Yeah.
This,
Okay.
okay,
good.
perfect.
Thank you.
Okay, 1 minute. And okay, we are officially live. Fantastic. So welcome back. It took, oh, hi, Ken. It took some time to reconnect all together as a group, but I'm really happy to have the California Phenomenology Circle meeting again this month. Today, we are very happy to host the presentation of Professor Jeff Ogle. He's an associate professor of philosophy in PPEL, Philosophy, Politics, Economics, and Law, at the department at Regis University. He's also the coordinator of Regis Colleges and is excited to have very recently earned tenure completely in the last several weeks and to begin to be going on sabbatical in the fall. It's quite
Super excited.
a wise move.
Thank you.
Congratulations. The floor is all yours. He's going to present on Descartes, Husserl, Descartes, and Transcendental arguments. Looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you. Well, thanks for coming, folks. I haven't really changed the title officially, but this is a more informative title for the talk. Husserl, Descartes, and Transcendental Arguments. That's what we're really trying to talk about here. I'm going to have to read through this paper a bit. I hope that's not too boring, and I tried to make some slides that will help you along the way, right? So if you're not sure, if you get lost in some dense prose, and I apologize if you do, we've got some slides to help you out here. Okay, so here we go. Perhaps famously, Husserl credits Descartes with the discovery of absolute consciousness or transcendental consciousness, while at the same time Husserl believed that Descartes did not know precisely what he had uncovered. Ideas, Volume 1, Sections 33 and 34 seem particularly relevant in support of these points. Moreover, Husserl compares Cartesian doubt favorably to the epoche, stating that the attempt to doubt the entire world, though it cannot be entirely successful, neutralizes the general thesis. Or in other words, it suspends the natural attitude for at least the length of time that one attempts to doubt. Sections 31 to 32 of Ideas are helpful there. Though it is less remarked on, this connection between the epoche and the attempt to doubt might very well put one in mind of Descartes' mnemonic device of the evil demon. I see this as a mnemonic device because Descartes formulates it nearly at the end of his first meditation, apparently after he has already invoked the strongest doubt to be found within that meditation. I will say more about the evil demon and the context in which the evil demon is invoked later. I'm just whetting your appetites at this point. Okay, so far I've primarily tried to remind you of some points of connection between the Husserlian and the Cartesian projects. I believe these points are widely known and appreciated, with the exception of the evil demon. Also, these points are pretty prominent in Husserl's ideas pertaining to a pure phenomenology and to a phenomenological philosophy of 1913. But I want to focus on a lesser known text for this talk. I want to focus on a lecture titled The Idea of Phenomenology, which was originally presented in 1907. In some parts of this lecture, Husserl seems to be in close conversation with Descartes. And in fact, this 1907 lecture might mark the first occasion on which Descartes is credited with discovering absolute consciousness, though Husserl doesn't use the phrase absolute consciousness here. I believe that this earlier attribution is of special interest because the text in which it occurs is relatively short and very focused. So I think we have some reason to hope that the idea of phenomenology might clarify Descartes' impact on what would eventually be called transcendental phenomenology or even transcendental idealism. Husserl seems to avoid the latter phrase, transcendental idealism, in his ideas. But on the other hand, he uses it in the Cartesian Meditations, as you all probably know. Okay, so here's what I'd like to do in the time available to us today. Right, so I want to go through Husserl's project in the 1907 lecture. It's a familiar project, but differently framed. I mean, this is a transitional period, right? So this is kind of halfway between the logical investigations and then the ideas. And so he's saying things that he's going to say later in the ideas, but they're not pitched in quite the same way. So it's a very interesting text for me. So I want to go over that, and then Husserl's take on what Descartes has contributed to his project. What does Husserl think Descartes has contributed? C, Descartes' role is actually larger than Husserl admits or allows, right? And so I wanna go through that. D, I want to bring out Descartes' transcendental arguments. I'm going to rely really heavily on Janet Broughton here. She does a wonderful job showing how Descartes makes use of transcendental arguments. So I'm going to draw on her. And then finally, I'm going to give Husserl's transcendental argument. I think his argumentative strategy closely resembles some of Descartes' strategies, right? And so I'm going to try to bring that out in a Husserlian transcendental argument. Okay. And here's where we'll end up. I might as well say the argument up front. And then I hope as we go through the talk to establish that this is the right way to interpret Husserl. Premise one. If I have a reason to doubt whether B, immanent knowledge is capable of reaching its transcendent objects, then I must grant that A, I have indubitable, cogitationes that present to me the phenomenon of knowledge whose ability to grasp its object I doubt. Okay, so in other words, if B, immanent knowledge, if I doubt whether immanent knowledge can reach its objects, then A, I have an indubitable presentation of the phenomenon of knowledge. Okay. Premise two, if A, I have indubitable cogitationes that present to me the phenomenon of knowledge, then through exploring the local phenomena of self-givenness and constitution, I can establish that B, immanent knowledge, is capable of grasping its transcendent objects. So if B then A is premise one, if A then B is premise two. So then the conclusion is if I doubt that B, then B, right? So if I raise a doubt whether B, immanent knowledge, is capable of reaching its transcendent objects, I must grant that B, immanent knowledge, is capable of grasping its transcendent objects. Okay, so hard to read apparently, but I hope that made sense. Okay. Let's see here. All right, so what's the project? What is Husserl's project? In lecture one of the idea of phenomenology, Husserl makes it clear that he is continuing a project begun quite fruitfully in his logical investigations. He wants to construct an epistemology that will ground all of knowledge, and in particular the positive sciences, since he sometimes seems to view these as undergoing a foundational crisis. As an epistemologist, Husserl takes upon himself a key negative task and a key positive one, and those are on the slide, although they're very brief. The negative task charged to any reasonable epistemology, per Husserl, is that it must refute the implicit and explicit skeptical theories regarding knowledge that tend to arise when it reflects on itself. So when knowledge reflects on itself, it gets skeptical, right? As we see in Hume, Hume also figures in the idea of phenomenology, right? And so Husserl thinks, maybe a little dogmatically, or however you want to think about that, hey, the epistemologist has to refute this stuff, right? We got to get rid of this skeptical streak. The positive task, I'll quote here from Husserl from page 18, is to solve the problems pertaining to the correlation of knowledge, its sense, and its object by inquiring into the essence of knowledge. There's a lot there. There's an issue of correlation, and there's an issue of the essence of knowledge, which is going to play a big role here. So more concretely, the correlation in question is the correlation between knowledge, which is a subjective phenomenon, and its transcendent objects, which are presumably objective. Pages 26 and 27 put this in terms of the riddle of knowledge. Husserl likes to talk about the riddle of knowledge here. Knowledge is immanent, but the objects studied by the positive sciences are transcendent. So the riddle is, how can immanent knowledge reach its transcendent objects? If we put Husserl's solution in his own terms, without reference to Descartes yet, it seems to amount to this. We must use the epoche to reduce our experience of knowledge to what is immanent to that experience, but the word immanent is ambiguous here. There is real or reala immanence, that is, what is strictly speaking contained within the reduced phenomenon of knowledge. So immanence as something contained, that's one kind. Then again, on page 63, where he sort of reflects on his lecture and tries to clarify what he said, there is immanence in the sense of the self-givenness that constitutes itself in evidence. And he sees this as two different kinds of immanence. There's what is contained, there is what is self-given. Somehow these immanent acts are able to give things that aren't contained in them. Okay. Not too surprisingly, the immanent content that is simply contained within knowledge, a seemingly negative characterization, is not going to be very helpful, right? It's not immediately helpful for us. Okay. With regard to the other sense of immanence, right, the self-givenness, we likely need an example or two to help us understand the characterization that I've tried to give. The primary examples we need to consider involve essence. As Husserl has already stated in the logical investigations, we can see the universal, or we can abstract it if you like, when it is grounded in the relevant or appropriate particular, right? He's got long discussions of that in the logical investigations, and he's drawing on that here. In other words, we can be presented with the species red on the basis of a perceptual presentation of red, or we can even seize on the essential difference between two shades of red when we have a perception of the two shades at issue. From there, at least according to Husserl, it becomes clear that we can seize on essential truths about knowledge, and one of those essential truths is that knowledge claims within the positive sciences tend to have transcendence built into their structure. That is, even within reduced knowledge, we can see that the sense of transcendence remains as a clue that can guide us with respect to how we might further flesh out or even fulfill the sense of transcendence that appears to us in eminence. Okay, and now I want to quote from Husserl to try to make this more clear. This is from page 35 of the Idea of Phenomenology. Husserl says, the relation to something transcendent, whether I question the existence of the transcendent object or the ability of the relation to make, or the ability of the relation to make contact with it, still contains something that can be apprehended within the pure phenomenon. The relating itself to something transcendent to refer to it in one way or another is an inner characteristic of the phenomenon. And that's from page 35, and those are my emphases there. So it's worth repeating, I think, to really emphasize it. There is internal to these acts, right, a relating to something transcendent. That's part of what the acts mean, right? And so we can read that off of the acts even when they're reduced, right? Even when we're sort of blocking the transcendent through some kind of reduction. Okay. Naturally, this kind of relation belongs to some intentional acts essentially, and there are essential truths to be gleaned with the help of eidetic analysis regarding how this relation with its accompanying sense of transcendence is to be fully realized. This brings us to the topic of constitution theory. Okay, so we have essence and eidetic insight. We've already gone over this. This is what we need here, and then that leads to a theory of constitution. Okay. On pages 52 to 53 of the idea of phenomenology, Husserl points out some essential truths about perceptual acts. I believe this audience will be familiar with the basic story. At a given moment in time, I might perceive a house, but through the phenomenological reduction, I note that what is presented to me as a content of consciousness is really just a profile or adumbration of a house. That's what the reduction up. Still, it is infused with the meaning house, and of course, house is a transcendent object. Suppose I walk around the house. Through the reduction, I experience the temporal appearing of the house, one profile after another. If this happens according to my expectations, then my perception of a house is confirmed. This series of strung together, this series of experiences, one perceptual act after another, each containing a new profile of the house, all strung together in such a way that they are able to present a coherent three-dimensional object, constitutes the house. And of course, in the content, sort of embedded in it, there's a bunch of sensory data, including kinesthetic sensations, right? And even in the reduction, we can see all that content, and we can see that the content means house. That is to say, according to the sense of the series of acts, which we can suppose are animated by a single meaning, the house appears in precisely this way that is determined by the unfolding experiences with their unified governing meaning. The appearance of the house is given, even though the phenomenological reduction is in place. Thus, in some sense, the house is given to us. For how could the appearance of the house be given? Well, the house is not in any sense given to us. And this is precisely why Husserl famously answers his own question about what is lost when the epoche suspends the general thesis, so that we are left only with the acts that intend this world, by saying nothing is lost. And that's in section 50 of Ideas Volume 1, right? And let me, that was a bit cumbersome the way I said that, so I'll say it again. Right. In other words, in section 50 of the Ideas, Husserl says to himself or to the reader, what is lost when we've got this reduction in place, when we've gotten rid of the transcendent objects in some sense, when we've neutralized the general thesis? Well, nothing. Nothing is lost, right? And why not? Well, the appearances are given in this absolute consciousness, and so then in some sense the object is given, right? It's still there in some sense. Okay, so that's the first part of the project, right? I just wanted to go through what Husserl is trying to do in the idea of phenomenology. And now we get to the second part of my project, which is, okay, let's say what Husserl takes Descartes' role to be here, right? And then that's leading up to a sort of correction. Well, hey, here are some other ways that Descartes plays a role. Okay, so here we go. Now that we've got Husserl's full project into view, we can be relatively brief about the role played by Descartes per Husserl's own interpretations of his project and of Descartes' works. There are two key touchstones provided by Descartes' work that Husserl takes to be guiding lights. First of all, there are the cogitationes, right? Husserl really loves that word. It's the plural of cogitatio, if I'm even saying that right. But anyway, we're just talking about thoughts, right? Descartes reflects on his own thoughts and he finds them sort of absolutely given, right? To use Husserl's terminology. So given my focus on transcendental arguments, I find it interesting that Husserl presents Descartes as in some sense backing up into certainty. That's the way I would look at it. Invoking Descartes' meditations, Husserl states that as soon as I say that everything is doubtful, it becomes evident that not everything is doubtful for me, right? And that's on page 23 of the idea of phenomenology. So, okay, this is just going over the two basic resources here. Let me see, and I think I've got, yeah, here's the quote I wanted to find. In every case of determinate doubt, it is without doubt that I am so doubting, right? And that's also on page 23 here. That is to say, in doubting things systematically in the way that Descartes invites us to doubt, I can come to realize that I am unable to doubt my own doubt, right? And then that maybe doesn't sound very promising at first, but Descartes is able to do a lot with that. And Husserl is also able to do a lot with the very notion of a cogitatione, or a cogitation and then a cogitationes in general. Husserl has no qualms about extending this same level of certainty to every cogitatio. He accepts that Descartes' point that I can know with complete certainty that I am judging, that I am perceiving, that I am wishing, etc. Without this point that every cogitatio can be known with certainty, Husserl wouldn't have the starting point he needs for his project. And so he credits Descartes with this and he acknowledges this debt. Husserl starts with the phenomenon of knowledge in the idea of phenomenology. And that means he starts by seizing on acts that purport to be acts of knowing, that are meant to be acts of knowing, that's part of their meaning. He starts with the imminent presentation of acts of knowledge to his thinking self, a thinking self that has been detached from the environment it is typically said to have knowledge of, and even from the body that is supposed to situate it within that environment. The main limitation to this Cartesian resource of cogitationes is that any particular cogitatio is simply a this here, as Husserl puts it, right? It's a particular, in other words. That is, I can be certain of the cogitatio itself, but without further argumentative and conceptual work, that certainty is sterile. It's not productive of other certainties in the way that Husserl requires. So the debt is, I got this notion of a cogitatio. It's completely certain, right? I can't doubt it. The limitation is, well, this isn't a productive certainty. These are just particulars. They're not really going anywhere. They're not, we can't build on them very well. Okay, however, let's see. Husserl also accepts Descartes' general criteria for certainty not as exhaustive, but as one path towards certainty among others. Namely, Husserl claims on page 37 that whatever presents itself as clear and distinct within any particular cogitatio, we are entitled to accept. Since these are general criteria, right, clarity and distinctness of perception, since they're general criteria, they have the potential to ramify beyond the particular cogitationes that satisfy them. Of course, Husserl well knows that this all ended badly for Descartes, right? So he made use of the clear and distinct perceptions, but then he stumbled into the Cartesian circle, and that's part of his legacy. And Husserl brings that up and says, these are good criteria up to a point, but yeah, Descartes didn't make great use of them. Okay, so going beyond what Husserl says explicitly, I will venture to say that Descartes makes both too little and too much of his clear and distinct perceptions, or CDPs, we can call them. He makes too much of them and too little from a Husserlian point of view. He makes too little of them because he never fully grasps the full connection between CDPs and essences, right? That's how Husserl would look at it, I think. But Descartes never thinks to grasp the essence of perception, or else he is too complacent in grasping it as one kind of thought among others in the second meditation. So either because he cannot get the phenomenon of intentionality clearly into view, or because of his lack of a general account of essences, Descartes is unable to develop constitution theory, which he needs to do what needs to be done here to get the world back. So when Descartes says in the third meditation that his ideas of particular objects are clear and distinct enough, when he doesn't treat them as representations of external things, he comes close to Husserl's point of view. I don't know, that's a very minor point in the third meditation, but I'll say it again. Somewhere in there, Descartes says, he's thinking about ideas of particular objects, like a idea of a goat, say. And it occurs to him that when he doesn't take them as representational, they're clear and distinct enough, right? In other words, he knows that he has a representation of a goat, right? The goat itself may or may not be there, but hey, here's a presentation of a goat, right? Descartes gets that far. I think that's pretty explicit in the third meditation. Um, okay. Yet Descartes certainly never arrives at the fully developed Husserlian view that the appearances of transcendent things can be given absolutely over time, so that according to our very sense of actuality, an external object can be given, though inadequately, in some bounded set of interconnected yet discrete acts of perception, each one of which captures a profile of the object. That's all called constitution. I'm just articulating constitution theory again. By way of summary, then, Husserl takes the certainty of the cogitationes, as understood originally by Descartes, as one touchstone. He takes the criteria of clarity and distinctness of perception as another touchstone, though he takes issue with Descartes' application of the criteria. Does Descartes actually provide Husserl with more than Husserl realizes or appreciates? I believe the answer to this question is yes. Otherwise, you'd have to wonder about the title of my talk, I guess. Okay, so Descartes offers more than Husserl allows. What do we have under that heading? Well, we have number one, technology of doubt. Number two, typology of acts. Number three, the coherence criterion. All of these things are things that are useful to Husserl that he could be a little more grateful for, but that's exaggerated, but he could acknowledge them better, I guess. Okay, so first of all, there's the technology of doubt, right? So with regard to the basic technology of doubting, there are the well-known stages of doubt in the first meditation. I read 3 stages here in the first meditation. Others read more, or they read less. People differ in their interpretations. There is number one, the doubt of immediate sensory perception by appeal to dreaming. Everybody seems to agree on that stage, right? I could be dreaming that I'm giving a presentation right now, so I'm not sure that I am. I'm not sure it's really happening, that sort of thing. Number two, there's the doubt of general objects, and thus doubt of the empirical sciences by appeal to the synthetic power of imagination. This is the analogy to painting, right? Painters could paint new things, or they could represent the things they've experienced, and Descartes realizes his imagination could be making up types of things, and that's how he doubts the empirical sciences and not just immediate sensory perception. So that's what I see as stage two of doubt. And then three, there's the doubt of the formal sciences, right? Arithmetic and geometry, by appeal to the idea of an omnipotent God. Of these three, the most useful to Husserl is the first. The appeal to dreaming can help us to neutralize the general thesis and focus on how things appear, which certainly can help us focus on how things are constituted in consciousness. So that's a great technology for doubting that Husserl could use. To my mind, though, the evil demon remains the most interesting technology of doubt and the one that could be the most useful to Husserl, though he has little to say about it. It is crucial to notice that Descartes claims to have doubted all those things he formally took to be true before he introduces the evil demon. And I've got a quote here from him. So this is the Adam Tannery edition of the Complete Works of Descartes, Volume 7, page 21. To all these arguments I have no answer, but at length I am forced to admit that there is nothing of all those things I once thought true, which it is not legitimate to doubt. Okay, so page 21, he says he doubted everything already. And then at page 22, he mentions the evil spirit or the evil demon. It's introduced after the doubt is complete. I will therefore suppose that some evil spirit, supremely powerful and cunning, has devoted all his efforts to deceiving me. To me, this is very important. A lot of people run together um, the doubt of arithmetic and geometry by appealing to an omnipotent God and the evil demon. And I think these are two very different moments in the meditations, and I probably Husserl, I don't know, he might have overlooked that they're different, right? So I think he could use the evil demon more than he does. Um, I'm just going to say something loosely instead of read all this stuff here. So what do I think is going on with the evil demon? Well, what Descartes says when he wants to introduce the evil demon is, look, I've doubted all this stuff, right? I've doubted everything that I formerly believed. But my problem is I have bad habits. He says something like that. I have bad habits of believing. I'm complacent. I already doubted that 2 plus 2 equals 4, but then I end up believing it if I don't stop and think. Or, I already doubted that I'm giving a presentation, but then I kind of forgot that I should be doubting that or that I already doubted that. And so I was complacent and I believed what I already took the trouble to doubt. Okay? And that's how the evil demon gets introduced. Descartes asks the question, how am I going to fight this complacency? How am I going to avoid falling into these bad old habits? I know what I'll do. I'll pretend there's an evil demon who's using all his cunning to try to trick me, right? And so this evil demon um, is introduced to sort of create an active counterbalance with Descartes' tendency to fall back into his old beliefs, right? So there's this tendency in his psychology. He wants to be comfortable and complacent. He wants to believe the old things. And then he needs this sort of active force within his psychology to combat that. And that's where the evil demon comes in. And I think, that could be a useful device for Husserl. It could help to neutralize the general thesis as we need to do to get absolute consciousness into view. Okay, so I do have a question, Susie. I'm sorry. Am I supposed to go to 12:45 or is it more like 12:40 or?
Uh, So we generally do 30, 45 minutes of presentations and then to leave space for discussion.
So if I go to 12:45, that's okay. That's not.
12:45, because here it's
Oh,
11:36.
sorry. Yeah.
So
But
one
if I
more
go to
hour, no.
11:45,
Yeah, yeah. Okay, perfect.
it's
Of
okay.
course. Go ahead.
Okay. Thank you. All right. So that's technology of doubt. And then the next heading is typology of acts. Um, Descartes writes near the beginning of the third meditation, but now it seems that to proceed in an orderly fashion, I should first divide up all my thoughts into definite categories and examine to which of these truth and falsity can properly be said to pertain. That's pages 36 and 37 of the Meditations. So the context here is that Descartes has settled on clarity and distinction of perception, CDPs, as criteria for certainty and truth. So he's taking a mental inventory so he can determine if there are certain types of thoughts that are more clear and distinct than others. There are a lot of interpretive issues here, but I would say that Descartes ends up dividing his thoughts into ideas, affects, or affects, I should say, volitions, and judgments. Let me see. Well, okay, I mentioned that stuff already. And then here's the typology: ideas, affects, volitions, judgments. And Descartes notes in his own idiom that affects, volitions, and judgments, those three, are all generally connected to full propositions, right? So ideas are of particular objects, but affects, volitions, and judgments are connected to full propositions, not simple ideas. And this last point to me seems to have some loose relation to Brentano's point that all mental acts are either presentations or based on presentations. I think Descartes sees that or has a glimmer of it. And this is a point that Husserl keenly explores in his fifth investigation, right? By offering various interpretations of how that could work, where exactly presentations fit in to Husserl's own typology of intentional acts. To be clear, while I think the notion of an evil demon trying to deceive us is directly useful to Husserl, this typology is not in itself useful because it is so underdeveloped by Husserl's lights. Still, it's an important precedent set by Descartes and one that begins to enter into the territory of intentional analysis. So Descartes deserves some credit here. Finally, with regard to coherence, let's see, we'll work up to this quote. With regard to coherence, this is the criterion that Descartes makes use of in his sixth meditation to distinguish the content of dreams from the objects of waking life. This is, of course, after arguing in the first meditation that there is no sure sign or certain indication that one can appeal to definitively tell the two apart, right? You can't really tell dreams and waking life apart, he says in the first meditation. Then in the sixth meditation, he says, well, actually, we can appeal to coherence, right? So here's what Descartes writes on what is the last page of the main text of the Meditations in the Adam Tannery edition. I'm emphasizing that it's the last page because this seems to be how he wants to end things, right? So here's the quotation. But now it seems that, oh, sorry, wrong quotation. That is not the quotation I want, but it's here. Oh no. Ah, yes, sorry. But when things happen to me in such a way that I am distinctly aware of whence, where, and when they have come, and I connect the perception of them to the rest of my life without any gaps, then I am well and truly certain that they are happening not in my sleep, but when I am awake. Okay? So if I can connect everything together, if I can make it all coherent, then I can be sure that I'm awake and not asleep. Um, think what you want of that, but that's what he says pretty clearly. So if we can get all of experience to hang together, I don't really want to use the word awake. I want to say, well, that's our criterion of truth and reality. If we can get everything to hang together, right? And I do think Husserl is influenced by that, whether he realizes it or not. Okay. It is striking, going back to reading a little bit, it is striking that this is how Descartes more or less ends his famous work. Of course, coherence is an internal criterion, not an external one. So though Husserl is right to claim in the Cartesian Meditations that Descartes thinks he has found a little tag end of the world when he initially isolates transcendental consciousness, and that he tries to infer the existence of the rest of the world from this tiny piece of it, um, Descartes actually emphasizes a criterion of truth that is internal to transcendental consciousness, whether deliberately or not, by ending with the criterion. I mean, Descartes does try to infer the existence of the world from a little tag end. I'm not denying he does that. That's near the beginning of the sixth meditation. But then when you get to the end, he has this coherence criterion, which is a different criterion. Okay. Though Husserl has much more developed technical machinery than Descartes, his criterion is roughly the same, and he might have done well to notice that it's roughly the same. So it's already clear in the idea of phenomenology that by Husserl's lights, we access the real and the true when things give themselves in absolute consciousness in the ways that we expect them to. This is more rigidly codified in the Ideas Volume 1, when we find that the noema provides the sense of the object such that it determines when we are presented with the object and when we are not, right? So it's a matter of satisfied expectations or adequation, if you prefer. This line of thought continues in the Cartesian Meditations when we find that the sense of actuality accrues to coherent concatenations of experience revolving around single intentional objects. That seems to be how Husserl puts things in the Cartesian Meditations. And of course, in the Ideas, you get the noema, noesis structure, very important there. Okay, yeah. Now, just trying to focus on the key claim right now. Okay, so I state that Husserl would have done well to note that he and Descartes are both appealing to the coherence criterion of truth and reality, really, because then it would have been more clear to Husserl where one of his greatest vulnerabilities lies. Levinas is not the only one to press this critique, but he is one of the better known figures who tries to invert Husserl's model of truth. So in totality and infinity, Levinas argues at length that we access the truth when we allow the other to appear as other. That is not against the standard of our predetermined expectations. So Levinas is linking truth to what Husserl might call noematic explosion. Sometimes you get that term, right? So in some sense, it is when we are presented with incoherence, or you might say when we experience disconfirmation, that we are truly confronted with reality and all its strangeness. So there's much wisdom in this view, I would say, and Husserl could have benefited from taking it into account as he developed his transcendental idealism or transcendental phenomenology over the course of a few decades. Okay. All right, and so now we get to the
It's
next.
11:44, just to
Oh,
let you
okay.
know.
Okay, sorry.
It's
So
okay.
let me read just one of the Cartesian arguments and then go to my Husserlian argument. Okay, and then I'll try to make a point that wraps things up. Okay, so this is a key transcendental argument from Descartes' Meditations. Thank you to Janet Broughton. This is her take on Descartes, right? So premise one, if I have a reason to doubt whether B, I exist, I must grant that A, while it may be that I believe I exist because it is true, it may instead be that I am caused by a deceiving God to believe that I exist, and I cannot tell which account of my belief is true. That's premise one. Premise two. If A, either I believe that I exist because it is true, or I am caused by a deceiving God to believe that I exist, then at least it must be true that B, I exist. So I think I said this earlier, but I should repeat it. So if B, then A is premise one. Premise two is if A, then B, right? Or I should say, if I doubt that B, then A is the premise one. If A, then B is premise two. And then finally, we get the conclusion. So if I have reason to doubt whether B, I exist, I must grant that B, I exist, right? So that's the transcendental argument. So maybe we could talk about that more in the Q&A session, right? If people want to talk about that. But I think that's a very good reading of Descartes. I try to doubt that B, and I end up affirming that B. For Broughton, that's how Descartes typically does his work, okay? And so then I see something similar going on in Husserl's lecture, The Idea of Phenomenology. Okay, so now maybe it'll make more sense now that we've worked through all this other material. Premise one, if I have a reason to doubt whether B, immanent knowledge, is capable of reaching its transcendent objects, I must grant that A, I have indubitable cogitationes that present to me the phenomenon of knowledge, whose ability to grasp its object I doubt. So if I have reason to doubt that knowledge reaches its objects, then I have knowledge in view, right? So knowledge is present to me in a cogitationo, in cogitationes, excuse me. Okay, so second premise, if A, I have indubitable cogitationes that present to me the phenomenon of knowledge, then through exploring the local phenomena of self-givenness and constitution, I can establish that B, immanent knowledge, is capable of grasping its transcendent objects, at least in some sense, right? The appearance is there, and the appearance is the appearance of the object. So in a way, the object is given. Conclusion, so if I raise a doubt whether B, immanent knowledge, is capable of reaching its transcendent objects, I must grant that B, immanent knowledge, is capable of grasping its transcendent objects. I believe that is basically the structure of this lecture I've been discussing. Okay, so Husserl's argumentation mirrors Cartesian structure. So Husserl is extending Cartesian strategy. I think so. Husserl may be a Cartesian with better machinery, food for thought, something to consider. Some kind of Cartesian, perhaps, which he's kind of open about in the Cartesian Meditations. But if you're wondering how far back that goes, well, maybe it goes back all the way to 1907. Okay, and that is all, folks.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Thank you for the beautiful presentation. I loved your the expression of the technology of doubt.
Okay, good.
I open the floor to discussions and questions. I know that the group is always. Echo, Jeff, go ahead. I don't see you. I see the hand, but I don't see you.
Oh, do you see me now?
Echo, now I do.
All right. Hi, everybody. It's good to be here.
Hi.
Good to see a bunch of familiar faces, including you, Jeff. I just had a few comments, really. I really enjoyed that. I especially like what the Husserl is improved Cartesian and the stuff with coherence and the topology of X and technology of doubt. So kudos on that. Just in terms of the historical question of Descartes' influence on Husserl, I thought I'd mention, I just, while you were talking, I opened up that Logic and Theory of Knowledge, from 1906-7, but I think there was something from like around 1903. And so Descartes shows up a fair bit in that. So it's, additional material for you. And then you may know there's quite a bit of material on Descartes in First Philosophy. It's like which is translated now. So it's one of the 3 or 4 ways into the reduction.
Right.
And I think it even comes up a little in his earlier stuff on math. So there's just an interesting set of threads.
Yeah, thank you.
Another
This is
comment I'll
definitely
make
not
is just,
exhaustive. Thank you
sorry?
very much. This is definitely not exhaustive, so thank
Yeah,
you
yeah,
very
fair
much.
enough. For what it's worth. Maybe the stuff in a kind of penumbra right around that time. Um, and then I just thought it was interesting, the thing he says about Descartes, where it's like, yeah, he kind of had it, but he didn't have my full intentional constitutional theory. I think he says very similar things about Brentano and Dilthey. Seems to be
Yeah.
one of his strategies, and probably he's usually not being charitable enough. So I like the pushback there.
Okay.
Um, I guess I'll leave it at that. Yeah, that was a lot of fun. Thanks.
Yeah, good. Thank you, Jeff. Thanks for being here.
Um, Hi, Jeff. Yeah, my name's Ken. It's great to meet you. Um,
Thanks.
yeah, so um, I guess I take Husserl's main critique of Descartes to be that while on the one hand, yes, he is the first transcendental philosopher, he is the first who opens up this realm of pure consciousness for philosophical reflection. That, on the other hand, um, Descartes clearly only does this in order to get straight back to the world. He has a goal in mind from the beginning. And this is merely a means to that goal. Um, and um, and so as a result, the Cartesian epoche does not really remain in effect. Right.
Yeah.
Right. So that seems to me like the main distance that um, right he wants to establish between himself and Descartes, while at the same time putting himself in this, historical legacy of developing transcendental philosophy, starting with Descartes. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So
And
I've tried, oh,
no, so
okay. I've tried to complicate that picture at least.
hmm.
That sounds right. That sounds like the critique, and it's a very plausible critique. But I
Hmm.
also would say, okay, so if you look at the sixth meditation, right, that's when we get the world back. It takes a long time. And we do get a sort of probabilistic argument that the world exists. And it's a weird argument, right? And it goes through imagination. So I have an imagination and it reproduces sensory stuff. And why do I have an imagination? Well, I think it's because I'm intermingled with body, right? And so that's the best explanation I can think of for my ability to reproduce sensory stuff in my consciousness, something like that. And so there is a world in which I have a body and I have sensory organs that get impinged on, and so I get sensory stuff in my consciousness, right? And so that's closer to the beginning of the sixth meditation. But I do find it striking that we end on this note of coherence, and it's definitely an internal criterion. And so
Yeah, I
I
see.
accept what you're saying, and that seems right. But then also,
Yeah.
I'm struck by the fact that, oh, well, we ended on an internal criterion, and gosh, that must have really influenced Husserl. Whether I don't know,
Right.
whether he realized how much it was influencing him, but the
Right.
influence seems to be there.
All right. It's really interesting.
Oh, good.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, you're right. I don't think Husserl ever, in the crisis or anywhere else he discusses Descartes, acknowledges, yeah, this coherence.
No,
This,
exactly. Yeah.
yeah.
Okay,
So that's very nice.
thanks.
I saw David and Ron. Ron took a book.
Who's David first? Me?
Oh, Ron, go ahead.
Yes, I wanted to go back to the beginning of your talk when you described Husserl's task in the idea of phenomenology.
Okay.
You quoted from page 17, And the quote is, the positive task of the theory of knowledge is to solve the problems of the relations among cognition, its meaning, and its object by inquiring into the essence of cognition. You sort of skipped over its meaning. So the correlation is not between cognition and object, but between cognition, its meaning, and its object.
Okay.
And then he says, among these, there's the problem of explicating the essential meaning of being a cognizable object, or what comes to the same thing of being an object at all, of the meaning which is prescribed by the correlation a priori between cognition and being an object of cognition. So the link here, of course, is the sense of the object that we have. And that's just another way of saying what you said, that the relation to the object is immanent to the experience itself. But you might make a little bit more of that. And that seems to be sort of the core of the transcendental transcendental argument. In Kant's terms, there's sort of the notion of the transcendent object altogether. What's if you unpack that, then you start seeing that there's this correlation between experience and object.
Okay. Yeah, thank you.
It's not a disagreement. It's just
yeah, I realize that. I should have said more about meaning. I mean, I thought I was saying a lot about meaning, but I wasn't using the word meaning. Okay, that's fair. And David, I guess.
Okay, I'll jump in. First of all, I of course like holistic arguments.
Yeah.
And I too jumped into idea of phenomenology a couple of years ago, trying to figure out what people mean by transcendental. And what I came away with, it's coming from the medievals, and the highest thing that Husserl is after is consciousness. And that's not the strictly Kantian view that you back into this view. So I think the idea of coherence is really exciting to follow through, because that's exactly what constitution is all about, putting meanings together. Okay. Whatever you take of the intuition side. But there's the buzzword here to bring in. So the idea of the problem of demonstratives for the theory of intentionality is how you get from the intuitive structure inside the experience to the external object. So I think you're onto a really cool argument that way. And what I wanted to emphasize was I've been rereading since Dr. Falstall had died on March 1st. I was reading this long interview, and Dogfin's emphasis on Bolzano is he's always said on his own that it was Bolzano rather than Frege that was doing the work. Well, meanwhile, I was also reading Edgar Morsher's argument in a reconstruction of Bolzano in the Stanford Encyclopedia. And Bolzano's work will help you get into the idea of intuition, which was going around with both Husserl and Frege and other people at the late 19th century. So if intuition, as you were pointing out, has to take us to essences as well as physical objects, as well as internal experiences, then there's a strong argument for coherence. Whether Husserl got all the way through there, well, I wanted to bring in Bolzano because the mathematics of putting everything together in a sort of pre-topology era is right there on the table for Husserl to put together. So I think that's a great argument you've developed in the background. I still don't understand myself how transcendental arguments work, but they're really cool. I just see that Husserl himself was saying that, no, what I'm really after implicitly isn't just the Kantian style of argumentation, which is really cool on the face of it, but rather to the immediate experience of consciousness of objects external to us, which is the problem of demonstratives all over again. So there's a lot of wonderful coherence that fits together. And the idea of intuition, Anschauung is doing all the work there. Also, the difference between cognition, Erfahrung, and knowledge, Wissenschaft, is profound. So coherence, hooray, And that's a great argument you've got, Jeff.
Thanks very much, David. I was sorry to hear about Dogfin. I don't think I ever got to meet him. And I know that must have been difficult when he passed. I just heard about that recently. So sorry about that. Thanks for the notes. And I would like to get back to Bolzano, actually, mainly because, I was just teaching the logical investigations. And, we were trying to figure out propositions and where Husserl fits in and what he thinks the status of a proposition is metaphysically. And then, you end up going back to Bolzano. And so I would love to go back and read more Bolzano. And I'm going on sabbatical in the fall, so maybe I'll actually get to do it.
Start with Edgar Marsh's article. That's where I started. There's so much to read in Bolzano, and most of it's not translation. So,
okay.
Fantastic.
Well, thank you. Appreciate it.
If I may, to connect a little with what David was saying, the principle of coherence is also what works for the passive synthesis. So when we go in Husserl's later work, we find that as well as a principle that explains how the percepta connect with each other. And there as well, in the analysis of passive synthesis, he cites Descartes. So I really like how you connected these final words of Descartes and the initial projects of Husserl and how we save the body somehow in the meaning-making process.
Okay, thanks, Susie. Any other questions or comments? Yes, Hakamanesh?
Yes.
Am I saying that
That's right.
Okay, Hakamanesh. Okay.
So this is not going to come out very clear, warning you ahead of time.
Okay.
But I always thought there was a kind of difference between Husserl's Cartesianism and Descartes from the Meditations, because Descartes' cogito argument, it seems to me, appeals to a kind of two-level theory of consciousness, which is the kind of thing that Husserl rejects. He saw that in Brentano, and he rejected that. And I'm thinking here of, Logical Investigation 5. He starts out with Brentano's conceptions of consciousness. So I always thought that what he's describing there is actually a really good description of the cogito. The idea that whenever I'm conscious of something, I'm conscious of myself being conscious of something. So Husserl rejects that. Brentano really advocated for that.
Yeah.
And that seems to be a really good fit for what's going on in, I doubt myself thinking, and that establishes that I exist. Would you agree to that? That the thing that Husserl's criticizing there fits onto Descartes' cogito argument, that Descartes has a two-level theory of consciousness, kind of thing we usually attribute to Brentano? And if so, isn't that a big asymmetry between Husserl and Descartes? The detail is missing, but that's kind of an intuitive thing that I've always thought.
Well, I guess, Husserl explicitly rejects that reading. I'm not sure how we're forced, I guess, to attribute it to him. So I wouldn't, without further textual evidence, I guess I wouldn't attribute that to Husserl. But yeah, maybe he's not completely clear to himself. It's possible, but I guess I'm not seeing it yet. But maybe David has an idea.
We have also a question from YouTube. If Akamanesh is okay with this answer. Okay. So Christina was asking, is there a connection between the meaning and the lived body? She's a psychologist. She compliments your presentation, and she asks this question.
Yeah, I can't really answer that in terms of my paper, if that's the question. But if it's sort of a general question, then I should say that the idea of phenomenology by Jeff is it's an introduction to thing and space, right? And so if you go and you look at thing and space, that's sort of the next step in a way. And then you'll see how being embodied in space lends meaning to the objects in our environment. You'll begin to see. And then of course there's the second volume of ideas that you might read after that. And that'll give you a good sense of embodiment and how that helps us to intend objects. And so it enriches their meaning or lends them meaning to some extent. I hope I answered the question.
I think so.
Okay.
And David.
Throwing my hand again. Yeah, I'm also in favor of bringing Brentano back into the picture, and which has happened with the Brentano literature with a bunch of people. And I've at this late stage of the argument here for me anyway, and Ron, I think Husserl dropped the ball on how to respond to Brentano and also empathy at the same time. So I think both inner awareness and empathy belong together as to a twin phenomena. And the richness that follows Husserl in ideas 2 and then into Merleau-Ponty brings the embodiment back in. Now, I think it's totally cool that you find Descartes already pointing to that, a little anticipation there. So put them all together. And I tried to put a piece of structure together like that in my 1989 book, which was not officially a Husserl interpretation at all. But I think we still have that problem on the board. In a way, there's a basic form of inner awareness and a basic form of empathy, which is what I tried to write about. And I think they are pretty fundamental, and we should just go with that. So I think that fits with the coherence doctrine too. The way that we get into any of these ranges, the external object, the internal experience, the connection between them, the intentionality, it all fits together under the Constitution story, which is a story of coherence. So I think that's really sharply indicating how that notion is starting to come out. And again, if you put the math together with that, the way from Descartes to the 19th century and back forward, and then into 20th century mathematics, it's so all of the way things fit together is also in the back of Husserl's mind. So hooray for coherence and constitution. And meaning is all about that too, which is not to reject the some of the very common accounts of epoche. We just have to get more coherence between the so-called natural attitude and the so-called transcendental attitude. So constitution all the way through. Great.
I really appreciate the emphasis on intuition. So yeah, there's empathy, there's inner awareness. I mean, these are different kinds of intuition.
As well as of essence,
So,
you pointed
yeah.
out some of the points you dropped along the way as a pointer to
So there may be a
intuition.
general
Intuition
issue
is
of,
having evident experience of, and then you go through the list of what we are having immediate awareness of, and that has to include our own experience. So whether it's a separable higher order experience or not, Brentano is pushing that too hard, but we have to pull it back into the experience itself, a form of intuition. So we have an intuitive awareness of self and other, including other persons. I've been reading a lot of Edith Stein on that lately, and the best account of Haile and meaning and so on that I've read is in her, let's see, the title is Philosophy of Psychology and the Humanities. And that's before she converted to Catholicism. It's about pure phenomenology. It's really nice. And you can see this, again, you could use this story of constitution already at the level of the Haile, which is something that Duncan liked to emphasize, but I've never seen it really written out well until I saw what Stein was doing with it. So it's fascinating.
wow.
And empathy is always around the corner. And again, as with inner awareness, empathy is really unanalyzed until Stein.
Yeah.
Keep it simple, and then you're off and running in a rich world of phenomenology. Put it that way.
Right. Thank you so much.
And of course, with that, it brings intersubjectivity. I mean, then the solipsism of
Yes.
Descartes and the Husserl solipsism becomes something questionable.
Intersubjectivity takes over and is very rich. And it was always there from the beginning if intuition is doing all of the work. So that's really cool.
Yeah, the Anschauung.
All right. Well, thanks very much.
Thank
I love
you.
getting the comments and the feedback, and I hope to keep working on this in the fall.
I'm really
I'm
interested.
very grateful.
I'm really interested in these sort of connections between Descartes and Kant and Husserl myself. I, most people's knowledge of Husserl, they think of him as, from outside of Husserl studies, as standing at the beginning of phenomenology.
Yeah.
But Husserl did not see, obviously he couldn't, but he did that, he very much saw himself within a larger tradition and deepening that. And in the Crisis, he has this really interesting interpretation of Descartes as, Descartes' epoche of basically having Galilean science in view. He was trying to, right? And so it was like these achievements in science were what were originally motivating the first transcendental reduction. And so then you could almost then like tell a story of, oh, well, then sort of Newtonian science is maybe then motivating a deepening of that transcendental thought in Kant. And then, 19th century science as maybe then motivating Husserl. And so you start to then sort of have this, this picture of, science developing and then transcendental philosophy, like sort of prodding transcendental philosophy to reflect on these achievements, and in so doing reflect on achievement itself, reflect on consciousness itself. And I just don't, maybe someone has like written this down. I don't feel like I've ever seen anyone tell this story.
Not the way you're
sort of the
saying it.
intrinsic connection between the advances of science and transcendental philosophy.
There is someone, it's Maria Hartimo.
Oh, yeah. Okay.
A beautiful book on Husserl and mathematics.
Yeah.
So she really sort of answers all the questions that I wanted to hear that you're asking. It's exactly the same thing. And then she also brings out, and then Stella Moon, who did his dissertation on Husserlian phenomenology of mathematics, brought out more of this. Even the use of empathy in mathematics is absolutely crucial. I mean, math is a good example because we don't get it until we get it.
Yeah.
And the same thing we could say is true of the transcendental. We don't get it till we get it.
Yeah.
And I think that Husserl, in the idea of phenomenology, already was seeing Descartes as the transcendentalist. I mean, pardon the American position of that word, if you like.
Yeah.
So it's really cool. It's a very interesting story. And then it gets only richer if you can keep that in mind together with the richness that comes with Merleau-Ponty and the embodiment story that everybody loves today for good reason.
Yeah. All right.
All right. So thank you so much
Thanks,
for being here, to my child for being so patient, and to you, Jeff, for this wonderful presentation and all your comments.
All right.
So next time, Friday, we have another presenter, Agostino Cera. I'm very happy to see your faces again next week.
Okay.